Welcome, everybody. My name is Ann Dolin. I'm the president and founder of Educational Connections Tutoring and Test Prep. And today we're talking about reading and succeeding, how to encourage better reading comprehension skills in your child. And my presenter today is Jan Rowe. Jan, welcome. I would love for you to introduce yourself, but I'll circle back with everyone to let them know how the format will go, and then we'll get started.
All right. Yes, my name is Jan, and I am a tutor with Educational Connections. Before working with Educational Connections, I was a classroom teacher for 13 years, mostly middle school, also a little bit of elementary. So now I am a tutor full-time and absolutely love it. It's actually been fantastic to be able to sit one-on-one with kids and be able to discuss with them areas that they need a little bit more help. So this has, been fantastic, and I absolutely love working with all of our families.
Great. Thanks, Jan. So I know that we're here to talk about reading today, but I have a feeling dealing with the fall situation may be on everybody's mind too. What will the fall look like? Will it be all virtual? Will kids go back 2 days and then you have to supplement as a parent on the other days, or even just make sure they're up out of bed and doing something productive? So we've managed about 15, 20 minutes for the presentation on reading, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. We'll be wrapping up at 1 o'clock. However, if at any time as we go through the Q&A at the end, you would like to discuss the fall and have questions specifically about that, this is an open dialogue, and we welcome all kinds of questions, not just about reading. So Jan, let me turn it over to you and get going.
All right. Okay, great. All right. So we are going to be discussing comprehension today. And I wanted to start it off with questions that I get from parents. These are questions that I always get from parents, and I want to make sure that I address those today. So parents will say, well, what is comprehension? What does that look like for my elementary student and versus my middle or high school student? So I want to go through some of the things that they're looking for with comprehension. Also, is my child reading, comprehending at their grade level? How do I know this? And then what are some things that my child can do? What can I do to help? And then also, how do I know that it's working? What we're doing, how do I know that's working? All right, so reading comprehension. That is understanding what we're reading, but it's also, a student also needs to be able to decode. They need to be able to understand and define vocabulary. They need to be able to make connections with what they're reading, and then also draw conclusions. When they're in the younger grades, they might have a passage that they read, and they are given 5 multiple choice questions. But we know whenever they get into middle school and high school that it's a little bit more involved. And they need to be able to draw conclusions and not just answer multiple choice questions. All right, so we want to talk about what effective readers do. All right, effective readers read for understanding, not speed. And that was something that we were just discussing right before we started. I work with a lot of kids, and they're just like, I'm already done. I'm already done with that passage. And so then whenever I start discussing what we read, they have not picked up the main idea. They feel like that they are comprehending, or they're great readers if they can read really fast. All right, and so what we want to do is we want to slow them down so that they are reading for understanding. Also, effective readers, they know when they need to find the meaning of a word. So when I'm working with students, they will come across a word that they're not familiar with, and they know either they're going to use the context clues, or they say, you know what, I need to stop. I need to either Google it. I need to look this word up so that I have a better understanding of this word, so that I can have a better understanding of the passage that I'm reading. Effective readers also read passages more than one time. They tend to read a couple of times so that they can engage in what they're reading. The more you read it, the more engaged you are, the more you get from that passage. And I know I've read books more than once, and I hear all the time adults saying, I've read that book 3 or 4 times. And on the 4th time, I picked up so many things that I hadn't, picked up on the first couple of times I've read it. And so the more that we can encourage kids to do that, the more they're going to be engaged and the more they're going to pick up from the passages and stories they're reading. They also read a variety of texts. So I have a lot of students, they like to read just a certain series of books. And so what I want to do is encourage them to read other books, read other types of texts, to get more of a variety of texts. And then one other one I always talk about with the kids is listening to their inner voice. When they're reading, you have these voices that are talking to you, trying to tell you what characters are about. And so effective readers listen to that inner voice when they're reading. All right. So I want to talk to you also what I do whenever I'm working with students to help them. If I'm working with a child and they are having difficulty with comprehension, this is what I start with. So, and I've given you a little example here. So what I like to do is before I start is I will talk to the student and find out what their interests are, because I want to start with a high interest passage. Whenever kids are having difficulty with comprehension, whenever you can pick something that they are interested in, they tend to want to engage in the text and they will start applying these comprehension skills. So I have an example for you. And so I'd say if I'm working with a student, she likes baseball. And so I've picked a little passage about playing ball. And so I'm going to read the topic sentence to her, and then I'm going to go through some of these things that I want to address: prediction, connection, inferring, questions, visualizing, and summarizing. So I'll say, okay, Jackie was up at bat next. What do we think this passage is about? And so we're going to have that discussion first. After that, I'm going to tell her what I would like for her to do. I would like for her, when we're reading this passage, to start visualizing what she's reading. I want her to try to do these mental pictures, maybe come up with a movie in her mind. I want her to think about the setting, think about everything that's going on while she's reading this. And at the end, I am going to model this for her. I start off with modeling it first, and then gradually the kids are like, oh, let me go first. Let me tell you what I had in my mind. And so being able to help them visualize by modeling really teaches them how to do that on their own later on. So because a lot of times kids don't know what are you doing when you're reading. So the more you can tell them what is going on in your mind, that helps them train their brain when they're reading. So I'm going to go through those steps with her. So I'm going to say, okay, I want us to come up with pictures. And then at the end, we're going to discuss those. And then what I'd like for you to do after we discuss what our pictures were in our mind, then let's come up with a summary. If they're having a hard time summarizing the material, then we're going to go ahead and reread it again. And then we're just going to try it again. And then what I do is I start off with just paragraphs. And then I eventually get to pages, right? So I start off slow, and then we work up to pages or even chapters at the end, right? So that's what I usually do. And after we practice these comprehension skills with a passage that of high interest, then I'm going to take those and have them apply those comprehension skills to maybe a text or passages they're not as interested in. Okay. All right. So what does soccer have to do with reading? All right. So students who score well on reading tests are those with a broad knowledge. They usually know at least a little bit about topics or of the passages that they're being tested on. And so there has been studies that whenever students have a little bit of knowledge about what they're being tested on or reading about, they tend to comprehend the material a little bit more, and they tend to do better on the test. So there was a study that was done, and there was students that are effective readers that score really well on comprehension, but they didn't have any knowledge of soccer. They'd never played soccer. They didn't know the rules of soccer. And then there's also students that were considered students that weren't reading at grade level, but they played soccer. And they were both given, the groups were given the same passage, and the students that were playing soccer did as well as the students that were effective readers. So what that tells us is the more that they can engage in the text by using their real life situations, the more they're going to comprehend the information that they're reading. All right, so this is one of the questions my parents ask me all the time. What can my kids do? So what your kids can do is what I discussed with you, what I usually do when I'm working with them. I will ask them to start with forming mental pictures and images in their mind from the story or the text that they're reading. Read in short passages at first, and then have them be able to make sure that they have comprehended what they've read before they move on to the next paragraph or the next chapter. And then if they are having trouble engaging in the text, then I also suggest doing little stop and jots. So maybe after a paragraph or a page or a chapter, they just stop and jot about what they just read. They can summarize it. They can draw pictures. They can write down how they connect with the book or the passage. And then they can take that Post-it and just put it on the book. And then if they are getting to the next paragraph or the next chapter and they're not comprehending what they're reading, they can just go back to that stop and jot and back to the point where they were comprehending and start from that point. So stop and jots tend to really help the kids engage in that material. And then if they're reading text, like science text, history text, and they get a lot of vocabulary that they don't understand, then I suggest that they maybe set up little index cards. They can also do Post-its on this that give them the definition. So the next time they see the word, they're already going to have the meaning. And so it will help them comprehend the text that they're reading. All right. And what can you do as a parent at home to help? When you, as we were discussing earlier about when kids tend to read really fast, if you can have them try to read out loud a little bit more. Reading out loud slows them down. They are able to visualize a little bit better whenever they're reading out loud. And then they're able to say, okay, I understand what I just read, or I don't understand what I read. That tends to be much faster process for them when they're reading out loud. So reading out loud is one strategy that we use to slow kids down. Also providing the right level of book. The book, and I have a couple of websites that's going to help you with that. But if you find a book that your child reads that they enjoy and you feel like that's the right level and they feel it's the right level, then you would want to get the Lexile level of that book, and then you can use that to help you find the next book. All right. And then what I do with my students when they're reading a book, then I tell them, let's just start off with the next session. And I want you to just tell me about the book that you're reading. Let's just discuss it. And then we have a little book talk by them just telling me. So the more that they can talk to you and discuss the book, the more they're going to engage and the more they're going to comprehend from that story. And then if you can help them connect it with their real life, that's even going to bring that level of comprehension up a little bit higher. All right. Okay, and so at this point, I have a few websites that I wanted to show you. All right. So we'll go there. All right, and the first website that I would like to show you is Lexile. And so these sites, there's one of them that you would have to pay for, but these are free sites that you can go to. And this one is Lexile, which is a fantastic site. And I'm going to show you how to use this. And so if you click on Lexile and you go to find a book. All right, when you go here, if you want to put in the book that your child is reading, it's going to give you the Lexile level, and so that you'll have an idea. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because of the point that I made about high interest material. When you get the Lexile that your child is reading, you can use that for the next site to Google high interest articles that will keep your child interested. So So that's why the Lexile is important for finding high interest levels and then finding other books that you want your child to read. So you can just put the name of the book that your child's reading and you can get the Lexile of that particular book. But let's say you don't have one in mind. This is a great site for you to go to. Let's say you have an 8th grader. You're just going to choose 8th grade. And then if the books that the child's reading at 8th grade is just right, if the child feels they're a little easy, you'd click a little bit easy, a little difficult. But let's say this child says they're just right. It's going to give you the range of 8th grade, the Lexile. And let's say this child likes mystery books. So I'm going to click on mystery books. And then you're going to search. And then it's going to give you books that you can pick from and your child can pick from, and you can get an idea of great books for your child to read. All right, and they can go through and get an idea, and you have the Lexile levels right there for you. Okay, and then I'd like to show you, I know we're running a little low on time, so just want to go through here because these I feel really helpful. Newsella is a wonderful site to go to. You can go onto this site for free just with an account. I mean, just signing up with your email. If you go here, these are all current news articles. There's so many here, and kids find these so fascinating. But what I find so great about this site is that I can Google, if I'm talking to a student and I have a student that's having difficulty with comprehension and absolutely loves dirt biking, and then I have one that loves swimming, so I can go here and I can Google that and I can get those articles for those kids to read. So I'm going to do a little, all you do is a search and you can put in science articles. All right, let's say science, and then I'm just going to choose this cute little critter here. All right, so right here, so if my student that I'm working with likes science and likes reading about animals, then I'm going to pick this article. And what's fantastic about this is you can go right here, depending on your child's Lexile, and you can change the level of the text. So if you want your child to read, if they're reading, if they're elementary, early middle school, you could pick the Lexile, and it's going to change the level of the text for you, which is fantastic. So you have so many articles that you can read here. There's some about live webcams that you can go on to. So it just branches you into so many things. So this is a great place for high interest articles to get your kids reading. Okay, and then I also want to, I've had a lot of parents ask me, is there just one site that I can go to that will, help engage my child? And so I love IXL. I love IXL. I cannot recommend IXL enough, but IXL is one of those places, if you're just wanting one place to go, IXL is a wonderful site. You do need a subscription to this one, but I think it's only like $10 a month to do that, but it has all the grade levels. And let's just say I'm going to pick 9th grade reading. And before you pay for the subscription, you can actually go here and look at some of the examples. So you can read some of the passages and look at them, and then they give the passage, and so you have reading comprehension here, and then they have the questions, and then they give you get immediate feedback. All right, and so this is something that kids really like. They like to be able to read, have questions, and then get immediate feedback on if they were correct or not. So this is a great site if you just want one site to go to. All right, and then do we have about 5 more minutes?
Yep, Jan, we're good.
Okay, all right, so about 5 more minutes. All right, another site that I'd like for you to show you is Open Library. We have, because of our current situation, there has been some libraries that are closed, and your child might not be able to get a book that they may want to read. Open Library is free, and you can browse by list, by grade level. All right, and so I have this one on grade level. And so again, you can go by grade level and you can look at all the books that this particular online library has. All right. And so, and it gives you a lot of examples, and you can go ahead and check out the book, and you can take a look at it. It also has audio. So it's an audio. It's monotone, but but you have it available if you like that. And then these are all free books. So if they're there, they're free for the student to read. Okay, and so that would be something. And then if
Jan,
yes,
can I ask a question about that? You mentioned it's monotone. Is it a real person reading the book, or is it software reading the book?
I think they have both. It just depends on the book, and because I've done a couple of them, and one of them sounds like more of a computer reading it, but then one of them was a person, but it was more. So yeah, so it's probably not the best for the audio, but it's a fantastic place for getting the books, and then they can get them right away, and so they can get them, immediately.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so that's open library. And then the last thing, which is a question that I always get from parents: how do I know all of this is working? How can I, test my child? And I'm going to tell you the best place for you to go to test your child to see if they're at grade level is the Virginia Department of Education. All right, so if you go, and this is one of the links that I have on the presentation, if you go here, you can pull the most current reading tests that they have for the state, so for grade level, and then you can also pull some archived ones. But if you pull one up, I'm just going to pull a 6th grade test up, and you can have your child go through and take this test, and then it will give you an idea of where your child stands with grade level, and if at what level they're working. Now at the end of the test, and there, you don't want to print these out because there's quite a few pages here, but at the end of the test, you're going to have the answer key. And so you can go through and check their answers. But then they also have, this is going to tell you if they were in a public school and they took this state test, at the bottom it tells you if they scored 28 of the questions correctly, then they would have passed the test. But if they scored 40 or more, then they would have received a pass advanced score. So that's going to give you a good idea of where your child is going to fall with reading comprehension based on state standards. And if you feel like your child is reading a little bit higher, then you can just give them the next grade level test. And then you'll be able to check their reading comprehension level. And it just gives you a good idea of, everything that you're doing, everything your child's putting in place, is it working? And then this would be a great place for you to go and determine that. Okay. All right. And then I think that is going to cover all of the websites. And I'm going to stop sharing here. And we can open it up to questions if you like.
Awesome. Thanks, Jan. So now would be a great time to put a question that you have in the Q&A. And I see one here already. So Jan, you can stop sharing if you want.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Oh, there you go. Sorry, I didn't realize you had a last slide. That's great.
Okay. Yeah.
You can leave that there. Yes. If you want to contact Jan, you can reach her by email. And also if you want to contact us, if you have a need for support for your child, feel free to email Jan, or you can contact me also, Ann, ANN at ectutoring.com. All right. So one mom asked, do you think there is better effectiveness in reading real books versus online reading for kids who are reading below grade level? I can share a couple of bits of research here, and then also, Jan, if you want to chime in with your experience as well. Sure. So for a child who's reading below grade level, if they want to read books that are actually at their level or a little bit above, so that means that because they're lower than where they should be, these would be harder books. There's research that shows that when kids actually listen to a book, and that's why I asked, is it a monotone book or is it a real reader? But if they listen to a book and on Audible, for example, or on one of the Bookshare sites, and they follow along as they're reading, they improve their comprehension and their fluency better than if they read alone. So there's something to hearing a good reader reading aloud that's super powerful for kids. Also, there's research that shows, and this was research done on sophomores in high school, so I'm not quite sure if it relates specifically to younger kids. Parents often ask, is there a difference in comprehension when you're reading hard copy books versus online? And in general, it's really a mixed bag. But one thing that we know is definitely better for the actual books, the hard copies, is the sequencing of events. And part of that is because when you're reading a book, especially at a high school level, there's a thickness involved. And when you're flipping the pages and things are going in sequence, there's something about holding that book and knowing where you are, the place, that aids your brain in sequencing events. So it can be the case that actually having a physical book, if your child prefers to read that way, is beneficial for them. Jan, any thoughts on online reading versus the actual books?
I absolutely agree with everything that you just said. I do have to say, I have a student. He had a very difficult time comprehending information. He started reading. He has started reading the books. He has the book, and then he will listen to readers on YouTube reading the book, and he follows along with them. And then after he gets through the chapter, he can tell me everything about the chapter, where before he was having a very difficult time. So I do agree with them. I feel with my students, it has been much easier for them to comprehend material when they can hold it than looking at it on the computer. So I have my kids print things out so that they can read it, and then they engage more in the material when they actually have it, and they can highlight it, and they are making notes on it. So even doing all the online sessions with them, I still have them printed out, and then they have it with them. I just have found my students that I work with do tend to comprehend when they can hold it and touch it, engage in it. Now, I do want to bring up the point that I do have some students that tend to skip words quite a bit, and they have a hard time comprehending. Now, they don't like using their finger in the book, but they do a really great job online. And so they will use their cursor, and they will use their cursor to follow along with what they need to read. And they've been having more success. So it does depend on your child and what they feel is going to benefit them the most. So I do see some positives in both sides.
Awesome. Thanks, Jan.
Sure.
So another mom asks, how do you improve comprehension for an 8th grader? And I'm wondering if she's thinking about an 8th grader because maybe the 8th grader doesn't like to read, or maybe only reads specific things like graphic novels. How do you help, especially if the child might be a little bit resistant?
Okay, so that is where I'm really going to find out what the interest levels of that child is. So that's my first thing that I do. I will ask them all kinds of questions on what they like to do, what they want to do, and then I do research on. I find those articles. I find books that will. I had a student that was similar to this, but absolutely loves Boy Scouts. And so he started reading the Hatchet books, and he couldn't put them down. So it's really takes finding, something that they're interested in, and then I also make them a part of that process. And then whenever they are engaged in the process, and okay, yes, I'm interested in this, and I'm going to go find a story, an article, and then they tend to want to do that more. I had a student that did not read anything, and then we ended up discovering that we were both fascinated with the Snake Island in Brazil, okay? And so we connected that way, and then I was able to find so many articles and videos, and now he's wanting to research all about these snakes because he couldn't believe all the stuff we found out about snakes. But that is what I would do, and that's how I usually connect with them, to find something that they like to read. And then it takes a little bit of time, but they'll get there. And the 8th grader that you're talking about will get there.
Thanks, Jan. She mentioned that he likes nonfiction books, so she solved
Oh,
half the problem in that knowing, he's interested in nonfiction.
okay, yes, that's going to be, yeah. So maybe going on to the Newsella site and looking up some nonfiction there, and then that tends to take them into other directions. Like I was mentioning the webcam. There's webcams on there, and so you can actually go and watch what's going on if you like watching the snakes or the animals. So, all right, but they can always email me if they have questions.
Thanks, Jan. I love that. I never heard of Snake Island,
Oh
so thanks for
yes,
sharing that.
it's fascinating. I told my whole family. They're like, "What? You are really into these snakes?" So,
It sounds like you really turned him on to reading and learning more. I love those stories. Thank you.
yeah.
So, another mom asks, how do you convince your kids to read different types of books?
Okay, so this can be a little bit challenging. So again, what I try to do is um, I'm going to have to take something that they're interested in and move them into other directions. What Newsella is a great site to go to because there's current events there, and you can just browse. And so whenever I do that with students, we go through it and we just look at the pictures and we look at the articles, and then they're going to say, oh, you know what? I'm interested in that. Oh, that's neat. I like that. They may not even have thought that they would be interested in it until they saw the pictures or they saw the article. And so then you can branch off into other types of text and say, oh, well, if you're interested in that, then maybe you'll be interested in reading this type of book. Let's try that. Now, sometimes kids will read things that there might be a little bit interested if they have a book, like a book group. It's like a book talk group. Sometimes I suggest that with families too, and that has been something that's taken off with a lot of families. They've decided, okay, let's pick something. Not everybody's interested in everything, but we're going to pick something, and everybody gets to pick one, and they read it and they discuss it. And because they're doing it with their family or doing it with friends, they end up becoming more interested in it because they're doing it with somebody else. So that might be something you want to try.
I love that idea. Thanks, Jan. Another mom said, or dad says, my 9-year-old avoids reading at all costs. Should I require him to read a certain amount of minutes each day, as teachers do with the reading logs? It's like pulling teeth. I have some thoughts on this, but
Sure.
if you'd like to start, or you want me to start?
Oh, I'll let you start. You can go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
So if your child's really resisting the reading log thing, and a lot of kids do, I wouldn't do it. I would put that aside and maybe consider that later. Once he's more available for reading. But sometimes when parents and kids are in a power struggle, and we're pushing on them, they push back even harder. And then when you are in that power struggle, there is absolutely no winner. So even if he will agree to read, it's kind of under duress, and there's probably not a lot of pleasure coming from that. We want to equate reading with pleasure for our kids. So we can do a couple things. One of them is to equate it with relaxation. So it could be before he goes to bed, and it might just be you reading to him. That's it. He doesn't read at all. It's just you reading to him. Or it may be you read 2 pages and he reads 2 pages of a very easy book so that it's tenable to him, or a graphic novel that he likes to read. Even if he's read it 4 times before, that's fine too. The idea is to make his brain think that this isn't so bad after all. And I like that approach, especially when the parent doesn't give feedback. And this seems counterintuitive to us as parents, because when our kids miss a word or it doesn't make sense, we want to jump in and say, oh, actually, it's dinner, not dog, or it's this, not that, or, oh, you said sits and it's sit. None of those things matter. They're out the window. So if we want to we want our kids to find greater pleasure, we can't critique anything they're doing, or they'll see that as a judgment call and they'll push back even harder than us. So that's where I would start, is reading aloud to him, or encouraging him to listen to a book on tape. I'm old, not on tape, but you know what I mean, a recorded book. And that's something that maybe feeling a little bit more pleasurable. The other thing that I've experienced with my own kids one of my kids was a reluctant reader, is deer time. And deer time is drop everything and read. And so it wasn't just me saying to him, hey, go up in your room and read a book, which I'd go up there a half hour later and he'd be playing with Legos or doing something else. I wasn't reading. It was everybody in our family, even if it was for 10 minutes, we each got something that we wanted to read. For him, it was a baseball magazine. I didn't care. It was something. And then it was like we were all in it together. We were all reading. So the deer time can work too. Jan, do you have
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
fantastic. Now, I heard you say that he was a 9-year-old boy. Is that correct? All right. So if there's books, Dan Gutman books. If you haven't tried those, I've had a lot of boys around that age, and they tend to really like those books. So there's so many of those. So you might want to try that. But everything that you mentioned is what I would suggest to families. And you know, especially those types of books, because the character in the Dan Gutman books, you know, feels the same way. Doesn't want to do the work, but you know, has you know, little. I don't want to give anything away, but it's a great book, and I think your son would probably connect with the characters in that book. So hopefully you can try that. But yes, I agree with Ann, and those are, you know, the suggestions that I would give also.
I love the Dan Gutman books. Jan, thank you so much for suggesting them.
Love them. Love them.
Yes, they're the best. Okay, let's see. We have a few more minutes left, and one parent asks: before the schools closed on March 11th, in March, my 11-year-old son loved reading and read independently for 30 to 60 minutes per day. Even though I have high interest books for him, he rarely reads now or only reads when I offer a reward. Help.
Okay. So that is going to be something that I think over the summer, you're probably going to have to continue with a little bit of rewards here and there to encourage your child to read a little bit. It does tend to go in, from what I have noticed with students that have enjoyed reading, they've stopped reading a little bit, but they do pick it back up again. And during that period of time, those little rewards do get them, you know, to read again. And then they will say, you know what, I really enjoyed that. I do go back to what Ann said, and being able to discuss what they're reading with somebody else. If there's any way that you can work out, maybe a friend, maybe if the friend could read a book, and then they can have a discussion about that book, or that, you know, whatever set of books that are high interest to him and maybe his friends. And then if not, the family reading a book and discussing. But I do have experience with this happening, and same families have said the same thing. Over the summer tends to be a slower period of time for reading. They do offer those little bit of rewards, but then it tends to come right back. But I would try seeing if you can do maybe a little group with their friends and see if that would work.
I love that idea of having a discussion group, a book group. And I know that scholastic.com has those online. If it can be with friends, that might even be better. But I think a book group also makes kids accountable, and they don't want to be embarrassed. So they don't want to show up for the book group if they were supposed to read chapter 2 and they're the only kid that hasn't read it. And it may be that, you know, because it could be at this time that you really want him to read, he doesn't really want to read it. And again, there's that power struggle, having somebody else in on the mix that's not mom or dad. Mm-hmm. And I think I found that, you know, I've had tutors, my kids are now 18 and 22. I've had tutors for them their whole lives. Even my older son who's going off to my younger son who's going off to college, he had a calculus tutor this morning, because I can't certainly help him with calculus. But I know that if I, as a parent, tried to help him or encourage him to do it on his own, he may not do it. But really, it's that somebody else. That's why a book group is so powerful, or a tutor, or a high school student, or somebody else in the mix can really be what's key, and that can be a motivating factor for kids as well. All right, Jan, I think we're out of questions right now. Do you have any last minute things that you want to share, or parents, any other questions before we wrap up?
One little point that I also have found over the summer that's been high interest, we mentioned earlier magazines, but there are magazines that you can go on to, Scholastic, and quite a few of them that have a high interest for kids, and they have really good articles and short stories in there, and those have been great for doing book talks as well. So if they want to Google and get some of those, that might be something to get them going through the summer. And they also have little activities in there and science projects and things like that, so they can kind of mix it up. I want to make sure I got that out.
Okay, awesome, Jan. Thank you for sharing that. That's super helpful. I love all your ideas, and they're always so creative. I always learn something on your webinars. So thank you for sharing your expertise, and all your students are so lucky to have you. That's for sure. All right, everybody. It was great to talk to you. We also have another webinar on Monday coming up, and this one is with Clifford Sussman. Clifford is a doctor of psychiatry. He's coming to talk to us about screen time and navigating screen time during the pandemic, which we're all seeing as parents that it's certainly increased. And for some of our kids, it's become a real issue. So he'll talk to us about how to help kids find other things to do with their time beyond just video games, TV, and their laptop. And then next week we have, later next week, Jan, we have you back again. Yep. And I know you have another topic next week. What will you be talking about then?
Study skills.
Awesome. So study skills, so important as we think about what the fall is going to be like. Thank you everyone so much for joining. If you want to pass this along to somebody else, we will send you a recording, and you can they can listen to it at a later time. I hope you all have a great day, and I wish you all the very best for the remainder of your summer. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.